Have you heard of Kleros? Kleros is an online court, online dispute resolution service, and it's really interesting. Here's how it works. So you have some kind of dispute. Let's say it's a householder builder dispute. Householder is claiming some big refund from the builder. Householder thinks that they should be repaid 50 grand because the work was not up to standard, and the builder is counterclaiming for 30 grand which the householder didn't pay on the final bill. So they submit their details of their claim to Kleros.io, and jurors randomly selected by the system, who are real people who have some expertise in the subject matter that's the subject of the dispute. They vote on the dispute, they review the evidence and vote, and the decision is made by the majority vote of jurors. Now then, the twist to this is that the whole setup is on the Ethereum blockchain. So it's a smart contract using cryptocurrency tokens to administer it, which makes it very hard to manipulate or to corrupt the system. And it uses a payment of money to the jurors based on the quality of their decisions to ensure fairness. So fairness is ensured through payment of money to the jurors based on the quality of their decisions. How does that work? Well, what happens is the parties to the dispute have to pay a fee to use the system, right? Just like they would with a traditional court or traditional arbitration. But also the jurors have to put up money, or rather they have to stake money. And the pot of money that's staked by the jurors is then divided up amongst those jurors that voted for the majority decision. So those that voted coherently in the Kleros terminology. Jurors can't communicate in this process. So they have to reach a conclusion thinking about what the other jurors are likely to come up with without actually communicating. In game theory, this is called a Schelling point, the point that people will reach through a kind of process of collaboration, but without any communication. The classic example is if two people have to agree on a meeting point, the meeting time and place in London tomorrow, but they can't communicate, they will come up with something like, we'll meet at Piccadilly Circus at noon. Or if you're in New York, by the information desk of Grand Central Terminal at noon, because those are well-known landmarks. And if your task is to think of a meeting place, you're going to meet this person, but you can't communicate with them. That's the kind of thing you'd come up with. Schelling point. And Kleros uses a similar game theory mechanism for jurors who are trying to reach a fair outcome to the dispute. So the effect of that is that if you're a juror, you have to think not only what do I think about this particular case, who do I think is right, or who do I think deserves to win, or which outcome should I pick? But I also have to think about what would another reasonably well-informed, honest juror think, and I've got to try and pick that option. So there's a bit of game theory going on there, which makes it interesting and helps make decisions more effective. And also, there's a built-in mechanism to ensure that jurors self-select for the expertise that they have. So there's no point staking money on a case about which you don't really know very much. If you have no expertise, you're unlikely to be able to vote coherently. And so on average, you're going to be losing your stake as a juror. So it automatically encourages jurors to adjudicate on disputes about which they know something. So in the case of the householder builder dispute, it could be builders or surveyors or people that have expertise in that industry who are acting as jurors and getting paid for it. You might think if there's a court system which relies on payment to jurors, may be open to corruption, because you could, in theory, offer to pay the jurors more money in order to pick your outcome. And that's difficult in practice with a smart contract-based system because it's all using anonymous crypto transactions. So you don't know who the jurors are, and it's pretty hard to find out. And also, there's a built-in appeals mechanism, which is, if I understand it correctly, each appeal puts more money at stake. And so it becomes increasingly and eventually prohibitively expensive for someone to continue to try and hobble the jury. At some point, they're going to end up getting burnt and just not be able to afford to continue to pay the jury off, even if they'd figured out a way to do that. Another interesting aspect of this is that the parties have to come up with just one option, one outcome, which they are asking the jurors to select, and the other side is selecting one outcome which they want the jurors to select. So there's only a choice of two possible outcomes, which discourages the kind of kitchen sink tactic that you often see in traditional litigation, where a party might just throw everything into their claim in the hope that the judge gives them something, or they submit an outrageous counterclaim, really intended just to scare off the claimant, rather than because they really think that's a reasonable amount to counterclaim. You see this two outcome only mechanism in baseball arbitration, where if there's a dispute between the salary that the player is getting from the club, the player can submit one number which they think they're entitled to, the club submits another number, and the arbitrator has to pick one of those two numbers. So it forces each side to pick a reasonable outcome. And Kleros uses the same kind of mechanism. In theory, Kleros can deal with cases where there's more than two outcomes, but you get the same kind of voting paradoxes that you get in political elections, where there's a vote split amongst many similar candidates. So in the case of Kleros, if there's several outcomes that all seem quite reasonable to the jurors, it's hard for the jurors to confidently select one outcome which they think the other jurors will also select. There are ways around that, and if you Google Kleros and social choice theory, there's an interesting paper about how to overcome some of those voting paradox problems. If you want to try it out, anyone could sign up as a juror if you have some expertise in the kind of disputes that are there. You need to put up quite a bit of money at the moment, because the transaction costs for moving cryptocurrency around are quite high. So really, to cover the transaction costs to get your Ethereum in the first place, and then to exchange some of that into PNK, which is the native token for Kleros, and to cover the gas fees and what have you, it's kind of looks like you need about £1,000 really to stake, to avoid having your stake wiped out by transaction fees. But nevertheless, it's open to anyone to have a look. It's at kleros.io. I have no connection with this organization, just presenting this because it's interesting. What's it got to do with mediation? This is clearly not mediation. This is clearly arbitration. But there are some parallels and some things I think we can learn as mediators from this. The process that the parties will have to go through to prepare their claim for something like Kleros, where you've got to present just one outcome which you think that a reasonable group of jurors will select, that helps you narrow down the issues and think about what is reasonable and what you really disagree with the other side about. Which is similar to the process for mediation, right? Helping the two sides get to a bit closer to resolving their dispute, even if they don't actually resolve it. As all mediators say, most mediations do settle on the day at mediation, but some of them don't. And so you can imagine actually the process of going through mediation might help you close the gap sufficiently, even if you can't quite bridge that gap during the mediation. By the end of the mediation, the two sides may be close enough and clear enough about what the areas of the dispute really are, in order to then use a service like Kleros to just close that final gap quickly and efficiently, without going through the normal process. If you don't settle at mediation, you're going to end up plowing on to court, which is racking up much more cost, and it's taking you months, possibly years to get a resolution. You can imagine the parties, after going through a mediation process, not quite settling, but being ready to just place their dispute in the hands of something like Kleros and have it then resolved the next day, or whatever, a week later. anyway, I think it's fascinating. Do let me know in the comments what you think.